Hello and welcome to the Cheap Seats podcast. I'm Brett McKay. Joining me from Cheap Seats in another part of the country, yet again, sports writer, number one ticket holder of the Ricky Martin fan club, Ryan O'Connell. How are you, mate?
Hello, Brett. How are you? I do love that intro.
Been working on it all week. All week. So, NRL Rep Weekend. I'm going to put it to you that City Country doesn't have a place anymore
At all?
Or on this weekend.
So at all, you don't think it has a place?
No, I reckon it'll be gone in 2 years.
Gone in 2 years?
Yeah.
And why do you think it'll be gone in 2 years?
It's in the papers there today. Over the last couple of years, less than half the number of players in City Country have gone on to play for New South Wales that year.
There's no question that it's lost its relevance. I think, when I was growing up, it was a proper pre-origin trial. It was basically, the top 30 players or whatever in New South Wales that were duking it out for a spot in New South Wales Blues team. That's certainly not the case anymore. Few reasons for that. One is this standalone rep weekend, which means Australia play on the Friday night, which means any New South Wales players in the Kangaroos team obviously don't play City Country, which kind of diminishes it straight away. Then there's also this case of players being pulled out or being pulled, or, their clubs pulling them out, or even a case of Laurie Daly knows who already he's picking in certain positions. So it kind of renders it useless in many ways, I guess.
Yeah, it does. And I think, Samoa Tonga will grow into something that's sort of hitting into that whole Western Sydney population as well. There's quite obviously going to be a place for it. I honestly think the only way to make City Country meaningful is to have some Queensland involvement in it, have the Queensland equivalent game, and then have the two winners play off. So, not only is it meaningful, but they're actually playing for something. In reality, I reckon there's more chance of North Korea and South Korea playing.
I guess the only reason with having City Country for Queensland in New South Wales and the winners playing off is you're adding another weekend or another game to the already fairly crowded schedule for the year.
Yeah.
I think in my perfect world, I'd see it as City Country as a pre-origin trial, and Queensland can do the exact same. The best players from that, the starting 13 and then 4 bench players are picked, then they play Origin, and then the best players from the Origin series play in the Anzac Test.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that.
That seems like a linear process for me that makes sense.
I wrote an article probably 3 years ago, and outlined a plan for City Country, and I included that whole Queensland idea, and I ended up coming up with a season that, even with 16 or 18 teams, actually ended up being a week shorter with standalone State of Origin weekends than we have now. So it can certainly be done, but,
we're not going to solve logistics right here, right now, but I do think there is a better way of doing it that would accommodate both New South Wales and Queensland, along with making more of that Australia game even. I just think it's all over the place now to have City Country on the same weekend as the Anzac Test, then the Origin following it. It just doesn't feel natural to me.
Yeah, no, completely agree. In its current form, I give City Country 2 years.
Okay, well, in the current form, I agree, but I think something will be done about it next year, because I don't think we can go on with how it's been done now.
No. And that's before we even, and we won't, but that's before we even get into the argument about City Country being not even live on TV. So, Shane Watson, mate, what's occurring there?
Well, look, my first thought when I heard that he was resigning from vice captaincy is that he was pushed. He assures everyone that's not the case. My second thought was, wow, you've just removed one string from your bow that was very important to you getting selected, because on statistics and performance over the last 2 years, you're not getting picked as a player alone. So the vice captaincy was one reason he was getting picked. To chuck that in, it's a pretty risky move from him, I think.
It's a massively risky move. Are we to believe now that he is just solely a batsman? He's not even theoretically a leader anymore. So if he's not a leader and he's not a bowler...
Yeah, well, he's superfluous to needs at the moment, isn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. It's very strange, and I guess it highlights the fairly large hole that's in behind Michael Clark now. Who do you put in?
Well, I mean, if they were framing a market for it a bit, there'd be some very interesting odds. I mean, personally, if a gun was put in my head, I had to choose a vice captain now, I'd actually go against one of my beliefs of actually naming a fast bowler as vice captain, and I'd probably give it to Peter Siddle.
Yep.
And not so much from a tactical point of view, but more from a point of view of, you just feel like he loves wearing that baggy green. He loves representing Australia. He's got a big heart, big ticker, all those cliches you hear. And I think at the moment when there's a little bit of There's a feeling that the public isn't quite respecting our cricketers as much as they used to. I think Peter Siddle could probably go a long way from a PR point of view of solving that.
Yeah, I had him on my list as well. I'll read my list to you. I've got Wade and Siddle are obvious candidates to me.
Obvious?
Yeah, I think so. I think they're, apart from Clark, I reckon they're the next two picked in the Test team. I'll give you a second line of betting if you like. I've got David Warner, Ed Cowan, and George Bailey.
That says to me that the cupboard is quite bare from a leadership point of view.
Yeah.
Warner, yes, okay, there's not too many people banging down the door behind him, but geez, you want someone responsible as vice captain. His shot selection is about as far away from responsible as you can get.
Yeah. Look, I'll admit, Wade and Warner get on my list, and I think Wade's a better candidate than Warner, but those two get on my list primarily for the fact that they'll play all three forms, and you'll get a bit of stability along there. I'll give you one more really, really smoky, and I read this in the paper over the weekend, and it's actually a little bit disturbing. Brad Haddon.
Wow. Look, I'm a Haddon fan, you know that.
Yep.
My only issue with naming him as vice captain is he's not in the team at the moment. Wade is the number one keeper, so unless you're going to pick Haddon as a specialist batsman, or you're going to drop Wade, who you've just said might be a vice captaincy candidate, it'd be a big call for Haddon to be vice captain. But I'd have nothing against it from a leadership and tactical point of view and respect of the players.
Oh, yeah, leadership, respect, all that would certainly fit. The worry would be, it would just smack of a Band-Aid fix.
And the other thing is, if Watson's talked about a succession plan and the fact that him and Clark are the same age and that should be someone younger, they're then going to name Watson that's 4 years older than Watson. But to be fair, I don't think Watson actually gave a crap about the succession planning, to be honest.
No, he's not. I completely agree. What's the old adage that there's no I in team, but there's five in individual brilliance? Well, let me just read out two little paragraphs here for you out of the media release. All right, this will be good. I think it's the right time for a change for both the team and me. I'll be honest, admit I wrestled with the decision for some time. However, once I made up my mind, I informed Cricket Australia so the selectors could consider their options for the Ashes, given the squads will be announced soon. I want to be the best test player I can be for Australia, and I think that by stepping down from the vice captaincy to focus my attention on scoring runs, taking wickets, and doing whatever is necessary to help the team achieve success, I won't be vice captain in title, but I think I can still be a leader and strong contributor around the group. So there's 5 I's in individual brilliance. There was 11 I's in those two paragraphs, and a me.
Look, I've never been Shane Watson's number one fan. I am going to cut him some slack on that for the sheer reason the subject matter was him. He was talking about him resigning from the vice captaincy, so I can understand why a lot of those sentences would start with I. However, it's probably not an isolated event either. But I will cut him some slack on that.
As soon as I read that, I just thought straight away that, Pat Howard was it's one of those cases of the truth being spoken in jest, where he said he's a team player sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of been a widely held belief that he's one of the more selfish players around. And cricket's a selfish game, I understand that, but I think I can do that by stepping down from the vice captaincy and focusing my attention on my own game, essentially. Bugger the rest of the team. I just want to do well myself.
Having said that, he might have been told that he's on thin ice and he really needs to start performing.
And maybe he was on thin ice. And then that just reinforces the fact that he should never have been captain in India. He should never have flown back.
No, but I mean, if we're going to run through the list of mistakes that made in India, this podcast is going to go for about 4 hours.
No, that's not going to happen. Speaking of mistakes in India, there's reports floating around this week that the second spinner for the Ashes tour could be a bolter of Glenn Campbell proportions. We're talking Ashton Agar from Western Australia.
Yeah, look, I'll be brutally honest. I hate it when people talk about players that they've only ever seen their stats or maybe a couple of overs. I haven't seen a lot of him, and so I hesitate to talk too much. I am going to go back on my word. Just in terms of stats, if someone is knocking down the door, I understand that, sometimes regardless of age, regardless of circumstances, they should have been picked. His Shield figures this year were 19 wickets at 28 with a strike rate of 57. Good solid figures. Nothing wrong with that for a spinner. They're not numbers that demand you get selected when you don't even have, you're not even a contracted player yet.
No, I completely agree. I can only think this is coming from the perspective that they want the ball going the opposite way to line. But then if that's the case, why wouldn't you take a punt on someone like Cameron Boyce from Queensland or Adam Zampa from, well, South Australia now?
Yeah.
Who haven't necessarily played more than Agar, but they have played more than Agar, if you catch my drift. They're not completely green. So I wonder if Agar's batting is coming into this. He played a couple of really handy knocks at the end of the Shield season, like match-saving knocks. So you'd hate to think that bowlers are being picked on their batting, but I wonder.
Well, if you're going to pick a bowler who turns it the other way to line and is a very good batsman, Steve O'Keefe. I don't know if you've heard of him. The selectors clearly haven't.
Stephen O'Keefe.
The Stockheads are up in uproar at the moment.
Yeah, I actually mentioned that on Twitter the other day, that when I sent a link around to that report from that was coming out of The Age, I just mentioned that the Stockheads evidently have got more work to do. Get back on the bandwagon, people.
Yeah, look, I mean, the only thing I can think about Agar if they do pick him is if they it's a long tour. The Ashes is the longest tour. It's not the worst place to take a second spinner if they're not going to play a test. They will get some tour matches. They'll be around the setup, around the Australian team, around those senior players. So from a grooming point of view, I agree with it. But if they actually think he's a second spinner and may actually play at Trent Bridge or a few of these other places, that's a bit of a worry.
It's a scary thought. He could be over there on a development. He was taken to India for work experience, but he's going to be over in England with Hampshire on a scholarship. If they really want him to get an idea of conditions, pick him on the Australia A tour and pull him into camp every now and again. But I can't seriously think we're playing into England's hands. Just annoys me.
I agree. And in terms of, here's a nice segue, in terms of surprising selections, let's move swiftly to George Smith and whether you think he'll get picked for the Lions.
Well, I'll tell you what, had you have asked me this yesterday, I would have said no, and I'd agree with it. However, he was referred to in telecasts overnight as an Australian contracted player, and that to me tells, even though he's technically not, that to me suggests that the attitude is obviously changing. The desire to pick him if he's allowed to is obviously there. So look, Liam Gill, Michael Hooper are both really, really good players. George Smith's fourth test in his career was against the British and Irish Lions in Australia. That was his first home test was against the Lions. So, yes, it'd be fantastic to see George Smith back, and it is great to see him back playing for the Brumbies and playing Super Rugby again. But why? Why are we even having this conversation?
Why? I'll tell you why. If he's the best number 7 in Australia and he's eligible to play for the Wallabies, you pick him. It's black and white for me. I don't care about anything else. I don't care about age. I don't care about anything about developing players. You pick the best team because the Wallabies aren't in a position to develop players. We've been trying to do that for a couple of years, and look where it's got us.
Yeah, but my argument on that is that he's not by the length of the he's only the best player in terms that you can't really measure. He's the best player in terms of experience. He's the best player in terms of the fact that he played 110 tests before he was 29 and left Australia and all that. When you look at his numbers alongside Hooper and Gill this year, they're actually pretty similar. They're certainly leading the breakdown contest for their respective sides, but that's what you expect from a number 7. I don't think it's one of those cases where if the young blokes are keeping up with a dead set legend of the game, then it's actually a moral victory for the young blokes. And so why don't we back them?
I'd agree with that. And to clarify, I didn't say George Smith was the best number 7 in Australia. But
no.
He's deemed by the selectors and Robbie Deans to be the best number 7 and he's eligible, you pick him. If you don't think he's number 7, fine. That's a totally different conversation. But if he's eligible and he's deemed the best, you pick him.
Yeah, the if he's eligible is going to be the big question that decides it. Obviously, there's no question about his form. And it's obviously established now that he's a wanted player. It's going to be a case of whether he's considered eligible or not. That's the 64 question.
Riddle me this: if it wasn't the Lions and the timing was just 2 months later, and it was the Rugby Championship, and it was just the Springboks, the All Blacks, and the Pumas, would there be the same?
No, look, absolutely. And I've made this point. If this was any other year. And even if it was maybe in any other position, there's just no way we'd be having this conversation.
Why not any other position? 7's where we've got the most depth, isn't it?
Oh, not necessarily. Oh, yeah, maybe. Certainly, if it was any other year, it just wouldn't be happening. Smith come over to be a backup squad player for the Brumbies, not because it was a Lions year, and not even because Pocock was injured. Pocock went down in Smith's first game back.
True.
So it's, it's all just been a happy little coincidence. And I think if this is all, if the Lions series was last year, and, we're just talking about inbound June tests against, I don't know, France or whoever, Smith wouldn't even care, wouldn't play.
Mm. Well, he's an all-time great, and I think it's a great story. There's a nice romance to it. There's a great angle. Talking about all-time greats.
Oh, there it is.
Adam Scott.
Segue of the day, people.
Adam Scott.
How good was that?
It was pretty darn good.
That was it transcended sport.
Well, I think particularly for Australians, I do vividly remember watching Greg Norman in '96 with that 6-stroke lead he had going in the final day, and then ended up just capitulating and lost by 5 strokes to Nick Faldo. I remember watching that and feeling devastated. I'm going to be called a wanker for saying this. Watching Adam Scott, it really felt like we were exercising demons as a nation. And I know that sounds silly. It's one play, it's golf, but it really did feel like it got that monkey off our back.
Yeah.
And to hear him, the first thing he said as he was interviewed was to pay respect to Greg Norman and how much a mentor he was and a hero for all young golfers. It was great to hear.
Yeah, I completely agree. And Scott exercised a few of his own demons as well, because he had that. He was leading on the turn at the British Open last year, had 4 bogeys and ran, about 5th. So, yeah, look, great moment. It's interesting in the record. I've heard it already referred to as the greatest sporting moment the greatest sporting moment in 2013 for Australia.
That probably says more about Australian sport in 2013 than anything else. But I would probably agree with that so far.
But it'd be interesting even in 5 years' time, and who knows how many more Australians might win majors between now and then, and even the Masters. It'd be interesting in 5 years' time where Adam Scott's win at Augusta in 2013 is ruled, and where it's seen in the whole, pantheon of Australian sport.
Yeah, I agree. I think it'd be very interesting to look back at that in 5 years' time and kind of grade it, so to speak.
Well, when we do podcast number 150 in 5 years' time, we'll come back to that point. But that might be it, I think, mate, from the Cheap Seats this week. So join us again next week for more ramblings and the odd disagreement from the world of sport and all that business. Until then, I've been Brett McKay. He's been Ryan O'Connell.
Stay cheap, people.
Bye for now.